The cold November wind felt like sharp knives cutting through Clara's torn wedding dress. She had been walking for 3 days now, and her bare feet were bleeding on the rough ground. Every step hurt more than the last, but she kept going because stopping meant dying. Behind her, somewhere in the darkness, Vincent Harwick's men were still looking for her. She could almost hear their horses and their angry voices calling her name. The thought made her walk faster, even though her legs felt like they might give out any moment. Clara pulled the dirty white silk of her wedding dress tighter around her shoulders. 3 days ago, this same dress had been beautiful and clean, hanging in her bedroom while she prepared for what everyone said would be the happiest day of her life. Now it was torn and stained with mud, blood, and tears. She remembered that terrible moment when she overheard Vincent talking to his lawyer in the study. They thought she was in the garden picking flowers for her wedding bouquet, but she had come back inside to get her mother's necklace. That's when she heard Vincent's real plan. "Once I marry the girl, all of her father's land becomes mine," Vincent had said with a cold laugh. "Those water rights alone are worth more than everything else I own." The old man was smart to hide those documents before he died, but his daughter doesn't even know what she has. Clara's hands had shaken as she listened. Her father had died just 6 months ago, and she thought Vincent truly loved her. She believed he wanted to take care of her and protect her father's legacy. But now she knew the truth. Vincent only wanted her for the land and the water rights that came with it. That night, while everyone slept, Clara had run away. She took nothing but the clothes on her back and the small bag of money her father had hidden under the floorboards of his study. She knew Vincent would come after her, but she couldn't marry a man who had lied to her about everything. Now, 3 days later, her money was gone, her food was finished, and winter was coming fast to the Wyoming territory. The wind carried the smell of snow, and Clara knew she wouldn't survive another night in the open. In the distance, she saw a warm yellow light. It looked like it was coming from a house, though it was hard to tell in the darkness. Clara had never been this far from town before, but she had heard people talk about the ranches out here. Some of the ranchers were good people who might help a woman in trouble. Others were as dangerous as the men she was running from. She didn't have a choice anymore. She had to take the chance. Clara stumbled toward the light, falling down twice on the rocky ground. The second time she fell, she cut her knee on a sharp stone, and warm blood soaked through what was left of her dress. She wanted to cry, but she had no tears left. The light was coming from a big wooden house with a wide front porch. There were other buildings nearby that looked like barns and stables. This was definitely a ranch, and from the size of it, whoever lived here was doing well for themselves. Clara could see horses in a nearby corral and hear cattle somewhere in the darkness. The smell of wood smoke from the chimney made her think of warm fireplaces and hot food. Her stomach made a painful noise, reminding her that she hadn't eaten anything since yesterday morning. She walked up the wooden steps to the front porch, each step feeling like it might be her last. Her legs were shaking so badly now that she could barely stand. When she reached the heavy wooden door, she raised her hand to knock, but her strength finally gave out. Clara collapsed on the porch, her body hitting the wooden boards with a soft thud. She lay there in the cold, looking up at the stars and wondering if this was how her story would end. Just like her father, dying alone and far from the people who loved her. But then she heard footsteps inside the house. Someone was walking toward the door. Clara used every bit of strength she had left to call out. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely making any sound. "Please help me." The footsteps stopped. Clara held her breath, afraid that whoever was inside hadn't heard her or didn't want to help. But then she heard the sound of heavy boots coming closer to the door. "Please," she said again, a little louder this time. "I need help. I'll do anything. I'll work for you, cook for you, clean your house. I'll even be your wife if that's what you want. Just please don't let me die out here." The words came out before she could stop them. Clara couldn't believe she had just offered to marry a complete stranger, but she was beyond caring about proper behavior. She was fighting for her life now. The door opened slowly, and warm light spilled out onto the porch. Clara squinted up at the man standing in the doorway. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a beard that needed trimming. His clothes were simple, but clean work clothes that had seen a lot of use but were well cared for. The man looked down at her with dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Her torn dress, her bleeding feet, the way she was shaking from cold and fear. But his face didn't show what he was thinking. "What happened to you?" he asked. His voice was deep and careful, like a man who didn't waste words. "I ran away from my wedding," Clara said, surprised that she could still speak. "The man I was supposed to marry. He only wanted my father's land. I heard him talking about it. He was going to steal everything my father worked for." The man was quiet for a long moment, still looking down at her. Clara couldn't tell if he believed her or if he was about to close the door and leave her there to freeze. "Are you hurt bad?" he asked finally. "I don't think so," Clara said. "Just cold and tired and hungry. I've been walking for 3 days." 3 days? The man's eyebrows went up a little. "Where did you come from?" "Sweetwater," Clara said. "Vincent Harwick's place." At the mention of Vincent's name, something changed in the man's face. His jaw got tight and his eyes got harder. "Harwick," he said, like the name tasted bad in his mouth. "I know that name." "You do?" Clara felt a new wave of fear. What if this man worked for Vincent? What if he was going to send her back? "Yeah, I know him," the man said. "And that's exactly why I should help you." He bent down and carefully picked Clara up in his strong arms. She was surprised by how gentle he was, even though his hands were rough from years of ranch work. "My name's Jake Rivers," he said as he carried her into the warm house. "And lady, you just found the one place in this territory where Vincent Harwick can't touch you." Jake Rivers carried Clara into his house and set her down gently on a worn leather chair near the fireplace. The warmth from the fire felt like heaven against her frozen skin, but Clara was almost too tired to appreciate it. Her eyes kept closing, even though she tried to stay awake. "Don't fall asleep yet," Jake said, his voice firm but not unkind. "I need to look at those cuts on your feet first." Clara nodded weakly and watched as Jake moved around his kitchen, gathering supplies. The house was simple but clean, with sturdy wooden furniture and a few books on a shelf near the window. It felt like a home where someone actually lived. Not like the fancy but cold mansion where Vincent had planned to take her. Jake came back with a basin of warm water, some clean cloth, and a bottle of something that smelled strong like medicine. He knelt down in front of her chair and carefully lifted one of her feet. "This is going to hurt," he warned her before he started cleaning the cuts. Clara bit her lip to keep from crying out as Jake washed the dirt and blood from her wounds. His hands were gentle, despite their size, and he worked quickly but carefully. When he was done bandaging her feet, he handed her a cup of hot coffee and a plate with bread and butter. "Eat slowly," he said. "You don't want to make yourself sick." Clara wanted to eat everything at once, but she forced herself to take small bites. The bread tasted better than any fancy meal she had ever eaten at Vincent's house. While she ate, Jake sat across from her in another chair, studying her face in the firelight. "So you really ran away from Vincent Harwick," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes," Clara said between bites. "I was supposed to marry him yesterday morning, but the night before the wedding, I heard him talking to his lawyer about my father's land. He was only marrying me to get the water rights my father owned." Jake's face got hard again when she mentioned the water rights. "What do you know about those rights?" "Not much," Clara admitted. "My father never talked about business with me, but I know he had some important papers hidden in his study. After he died, Vincent was always asking me about them, but I told him I didn't know where they were." "Do you know where they are?" Jake asked. Clara looked at him carefully. She was starting to trust this man who had helped her, but she had learned to be careful about trusting anyone with important information. "Maybe," she said finally. "Why do you want to know?" Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the darkness. "Because Vincent Harwick has been trying to take over every small ranch in this area for the past 2 years. He uses the law when he can, and his hired guns when he can't. Those water rights your father had? They control the flow of water to half the ranches around here, including mine." Clara felt her stomach drop. You mean if Vincent gets those papers? He can cut off our water whenever he wants, Jake finished. Force us all to sell our land to him for almost nothing or watch our cattle die of thirst. They sat in silence for a while, both thinking about what this meant. Clara finished her bread and coffee, feeling stronger but also more worried than before. He'll keep looking for me, she said quietly. Vincent doesn't give up when he wants. Something I know, Jake said, which brings us to a problem. You can't stay here long without people talking. And if Vincent finds out you're here, he'll come with enough men to take you by force. Clara felt her heart sink. After everything she had been through, was Jake going to make her leave? Where can I go? She asked. I don't have any family left, and I don't have any money. Jake turned away from the window and looked at her. There might be one way, he said slowly. But you're not going to like it. What do you mean? You said something when you were on my porch about being willing to be my wife. Clara felt her face get hot. She had been so desperate that she barely remembered saying that. I was. Just ... double quote. I know you were desperate, Jake said. But maybe that wasn't such a crazy idea. Clara stared at him. What are you saying? Jake sat back down and leaned forward in his chair. I'm saying maybe we could help each other. You need protection from Vincent and you need a place to stay. I need someone who knows about those water rights and I could use help running this ranch. You want to marry me? Clara asked, hardly believing what she was hearing. A marriage of convenience, Jake said quickly, nothing more than that. You'd have my name and my protection and Vincent couldn't touch you. In return, you'd help me fight his land grab and keep this ranch running. Clara looked around the simple but comfortable room. It wasn't the life she had planned for herself, but it was better than being Vincent's prisoner or dying alone in the wilderness. What about ... She started, then stopped, feeling embarrassed. What about what? What about the marriage part? I mean, would you expect me to ... Jake's face got red and he looked away. No, he said firmly. This would be a business arrangement, nothing more. You'd have your own room, and I wouldn't bother you about anything like that. Clara felt relieved but also a little hurt, though. She couldn't understand why. And if I wanted to leave someday? Then you could leave, Jake said. But you'd have to wait until it was safe. Until Vincent gives up looking for you or until we can prove what he's really up to. Clara thought about her options. She could try to run again, but where would she go? She had no money and no family. Winter was coming, and she wouldn't survive on her own. Or she could go back to Vincent, but that would mean giving up her father's legacy and probably her freedom. 2. What about your ranch hands? She asked. What will they think about you suddenly having a wife? Jake shrugged. They're good men. They'll mind their own business if I tell them to. And what if Vincent doesn't believe we're really married? We'll make it legal, Jake said. There's a preacher in town who owes me a favor. We can ride there tomorrow if you agree. Clara stared into the fire, watching the flames dance and thinking about her father. He had been a strong man who never backed down from a fight. What would he want her to do? I have conditions, she said finally. Jake raised his eyebrows. What kind of conditions? First, I want to know everything about this ranch and about the water rights situation. If I'm going to help you fight Vincent, I need to understand what we're up against. Fair enough. Second, I want to learn how to do real ranch work. Cooking and cleaning, but also taking care of animals and fixing things. I don't want to be helpless anymore. Jake almost smiled at that. That can be arranged. And third, Clara said, her voice getting stronger, if we do this, we're partners in everything. I'm not just some woman you're protecting. We make decisions together. This time Jake did smile, just a little. You're tougher than you look. I have to be, Clara said. So do we have a deal? Jake stood up and held out his hand. We have a deal. Clara shook his hand, surprised by how right it felt. Maybe this crazy plan would actually work. 3 weeks had passed since Clara became Mrs. Rivers, and her hands told the story of every single day, where once they had been soft and pale from a life of embroidery and tea parties. Now they were rough and brown from working in the sun. She looked at the blisters on her palms as she walked toward the chicken coop, remembering how Jake had warned her that ranch life wasn't meant for delicate flowers. He had been testing her. She knew that now. On her first morning as his wife, Jake had handed her a bucket and pointed toward the barn. "Cows need milking," he had said simply. "Bessie's the one with the brown spots." Clara had never milked a cow in her life, but she wasn't about to admit that. She had watched her father's farmhands do it years ago, before he became successful enough to hire other people for such work. How hard could it be? Very hard, as it turned out. Bessie seemed to know that Clara had no idea what she was doing. The cow kept moving at exactly the wrong moments, stepping on Clara's feet and swishing her tail in Clara's face. After an hour of struggling, Clara had managed to get maybe half a bucket of milk, and most of that had foam on top from her clumsy technique. Jake had appeared in the barn doorway just as Bessie knocked over the bucket with her hind leg, spilling everything Clara had worked so hard to collect. Clara expected him to laugh or tell her to go back to the house where she belonged. Instead, he had walked over quietly and shown her the right way to position the bucket and hold the cow's udder. "Bessie can smell fear," he had said. "Act like you know what you're doing, even if you don't." That seemed to be Jake's philosophy about everything. Act confident, work hard, and figure things out as you go. Clara had taken that advice to heart. Now, 3 weeks later, she could milk Bessie faster than any of the ranch hands. She could also feed the chickens without getting pecked, collect eggs without breaking them, and cook meals for 12 hungry men without burning anything. Her back ached every night, and her arms felt like they were made of lead, but she had never felt stronger in her life. The ranch hands had been suspicious of her at first. They whispered among themselves when they thought she couldn't hear, wondering, what kind of woman shows up in the middle of the night and marries their boss within a day? But Clara had won them over by working harder than they expected and never complaining about anything, no matter how difficult or dirty the job was. Old Pete, the foreman who had worked for Jake's father before him, had been the hardest to convince. He was a gruff man in his 60s who didn't trust outsiders and especially didn't trust women who claimed they could do ranch work. But last week, when one of the horses got spooked during a thunderstorm and cut his leg on barbed wire, Clara had helped Pete hold the animal steady while Jake stitched up the wound. She never flinched, even when blood got all over her dress. "You're tougher than I thought," Pete had admitted afterward. "Most city women would have fainted at the first sight of blood." "I'm not most city women," Clara had replied. And she meant it. The truth was, Clara was discovering parts of herself she never knew existed. Growing up as the daughter of a successful businessman, she had been taught that her value came from her ability to look pretty, speak politely, and eventually marry well. No one had ever asked her what she wanted to do or what she might be good at. But here on the ranch, she was learning that she had a natural talent for understanding animals. The horses seemed to calm down when she was around, and even the most stubborn cattle would follow her lead. She had also discovered that she enjoyed solving problems and figuring out how to make things work better. That's why she was so excited about what she had found hidden in her father's papers after the marriage ceremony in town. Jake had taken Clara back to her father's house to collect her belongings and look for the water rights documents. Vincent's men had already been through the place, tearing it apart, looking for anything valuable, but they hadn't found what they were looking for. Clara had known exactly where to look. When she was little, her father used to hide birthday presents for her in a secret compartment behind the bookshelf in his study. She had discovered it by accident one day when she was 7 years old, but she never told him she knew about it. The compartment was still there, and so were the papers Vincent wanted so badly. But as Clara read through them by lamplight in Jake's kitchen, she realized they were much more important than anyone had thought. Her father hadn't just owned water rights to the stream that ran through his property. He owned the rights to the entire river system that fed water to most of the ranches in the county. According to the legal documents, he had bought these rights from the territorial government 20 years ago, back when water seemed unlimited and no one thought they would ever be valuable. But now, with more people moving west and the climate getting drier, those water rights were worth a fortune. Vincent had been smart to go after them, but he had made one big mistake. He assumed that Clara was just a helpless woman who didn't understand legal documents. "Jake," Clara had said when she finished reading, "we need to talk." She had explained everything to him, watching his face change as he understood what they were dealing with. Vincent wasn't just trying to steal one ranch or even a few ranches. He was planning to control the water supply for the entire region. With these rights, he could charge every rancher in the county whatever he wanted for water, Clara had said. Or he could cut off their water completely and force them to sell their land to him. Jake had been quiet for a long time, staring at the papers spread across his kitchen table. "How much do you think all this is worth?" he had finally asked. "More money than either of us has ever seen," Clara had answered. "But it's not about the money. It's about making sure that every family in this county can keep their land and their way of life." That's when Clara had started coming up with her plan. She had spent the last week riding around the county with Jake, visiting every small ranch and farm they could find. They told each family about Vincent's scheme and showed them copies of the water rights documents. Most of the ranchers were good people who just wanted to raise their cattle and live in peace. But they were also scared of Vincent and his hired guns. "What can we do against a man like that?" asked Tom Wilson, whose small ranch bordered Jake's property. "He's got money and men with guns. All we have is a few head of cattle and a lot of debt." "We have each other," Clara had said. "And we have the law on our side. These water rights are legal and binding. Vincent can't just take them by force." "Maybe not," said Tom's wife, Lucy. "But he can make our lives so miserable that we'll want to leave anyway." Clara knew Lucy was right. Vincent was already starting to put pressure on the smaller ranchers. His men had been seen riding around their properties at night, leaving dead animals near their water sources and making threats. 2 families had already sold their land to Vincent for much less than it was worth, just to get away from the harassment, but Clara also knew that Vincent's tactics would only work if the ranchers stayed isolated and afraid. If they worked together, they could protect each other and fight back against Vincent's intimidation. "I have an idea," she had told Jake on the ride home from the Wilson ranch. "But you're going to think it's crazy." "Most of your ideas are crazy," Jake had said with a smile. "Tell me anyway." Clara's plan was simple but dangerous. She wanted to call a meeting of all the small ranchers in the area and organize them into a group that could stand up to Vincent together. They would share information about Vincent's illegal activities, coordinate their defenses, and present a united front against his land grab. "It could work," Jake had admitted. "But it's also going to make Vincent very angry. Once he finds out what we're doing, he'll come after us with everything he has." "He's going to come after us anyway," Clara had pointed out. "At least this way. We won't be facing him alone." Now, as Clara scattered feed for the chickens and watched them peck at the grain, she thought about the meeting they had planned for tomorrow night. Representatives from 15 different ranches had agreed to come to Jake's property to hear what she had to say. It would be the biggest test yet of whether Clara Morrison had really become Clara Rivers and whether a former city girl could convince a group of tough ranchers to trust her with their futures. The barn was packed with more people than Clara had ever seen in one place on the ranch. 15 ranch families had come to hear what she had to say, their faces lit by the warm glow of lanterns hanging from the wooden beams. Children sat quietly on hay bales while their parents leaned forward in makeshift chairs, waiting to hear about Clara's plan. Clara stood at the front of the barn, her heart beating so fast she was sure everyone could hear it. These weren't the fancy society ladies she had grown up around who worried about proper manners and the latest fashions from back east. These were real people with dirt under their fingernails and worry lines around their eyes, people who worked from dawn to dusk just to keep their families fed and their cattle alive. Jake stood beside her, his presence giving her courage. Over the past month, their partnership had grown into something deeper than just a business arrangement, though neither of them had spoken about it out loud. They worked together like they had been partners for years, finishing each other's thoughts and anticipating each other's needs. "Most of you know why we're here," Clara began, her voice stronger than she felt. Vincent Harwick has been buying up land all around us, and he's not planning to stop until he owns everything in this county." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Everyone had their own story about Vincent's men showing up at their property, making offers that sounded generous until you read the fine print, or threatening trouble if the offers were refused. "But what you might not know," Clara continued, "is exactly how he's planning to force you off your land." She held up the water rights documents that had been hidden in her father's study. "These papers give legal control over the river system that feeds water to most of your ranches. Vincent has been trying to get his hands on them for 2 years, and he was planning to marry me to make it legal. So what's stopping him now?" called out Tom Wilson from the back of the barn. "You've, got the papers, but you're just one woman with one ranch. He's still got more money and more men than all of us put together." Clara had expected this question. "You're right that he has more money and more men, but we have something he doesn't have." "What's that?" asked Lucy Wilson, skepticism clear in her voice. "We have the law on our side," Clara said. "And we have, each other." She spent the next hour explaining her plan. The ranchers would form an official association, pooling their resources and coordinating their defenses. They would document every illegal thing Vincent's men did, building a case that could be presented to the territorial judge. Most importantly, they would never face Vincent's intimidation alone. "If his men show up at your ranch, you send word to the rest of us," Clara explained. "We all come running, and suddenly Vincent's men are outnumbered instead of the other way around." "That sounds good in theory," said an older man named Frank Patterson, who owned the largest ranch after Vincent's. "But what happens when Vincent figures out what we're doing? He's not going to just sit back and let us organize against him." "He's going to fight back," Jake said, speaking for the first time that evening. "Hard, but he's been picking us off one by one because we've been fighting him alone. Together we're stronger than he is." "Easy for you to say," Frank shot back. "You've got the toughest ranch hands in the county and the best defenses. Some of us are just families trying to make a living. We can't afford to get into a war with Vincent Harwick." Clara could see the fear in Frank's eyes, and she understood it. Vincent had a reputation for being ruthless with anyone who stood in his way. But she also knew that giving in to fear was exactly what Vincent was counting on. "Mr. Patterson," she said gently, "what do you think will happen to your family if you don't fight back?" "Vincent isn't going to stop with my father's water rights. He wants everything, and he'll keep taking it until there's nothing left for the rest of us." Frank was quiet for a long moment, looking around at his neighbors. Finally, he nodded. "You're right. If we don't stand up to him now, we'll lose everything." Anyway, one by one, the other ranchers agreed to join the association. They elected Jake as their leader and Clara as their legal advisor, since she was the only one who really understood the water rights documents and the territorial laws that protected them. As the meeting broke up and families began heading home in the darkness, Clara felt a mixture of excitement and terror. They had taken the first step, but she knew the real test was still to come. That test came sooner than anyone expected. 3 days later, Clara and Jake were in town buying supplies when they heard shouting from the direction of the Wilson Ranch. They rode hard toward the sound, arriving just in time to see thick black smoke rising from the direction of Tom and Lucy's barn. Vincent's men had struck in broad daylight, setting fire to the barn where Tom kept his winter hay supply. Without that hay, his cattle wouldn't survive the cold months ahead. It was exactly the kind of calculated cruelty that Vincent was known for. Not quite murder, but devastating enough to force a family into bankruptcy. Tom and Lucy were standing in their yard, watching helplessly as flames consumed months of hard work and their family's future security. Their 2 young children clung to Lucy's skirts, crying at the sight of the fire. "Did you see who did this?" Jake asked Tom as they organized a bucket brigade to keep the fire from spreading to the house. 3 of Vincent's men," Tom said, his voice tight with anger. "They rode up like they owned the place, threw torches into the hay and rode off laughing. Said this was just a warning about what happens to people who cause trouble." Clara felt a cold fury building in her chest. This wasn't just about land or money anymore. Vincent was destroying families, terrorizing children, and he was doing it because he thought he could get away with it. "We need to send word to the others," she told Jake. "This is exactly what we planned for." Within 2 hours, representatives from every ranch in their association had arrived at the Wilson property. They brought supplies to help rebuild the barn, food for the family, and most importantly, they brought the message that Tom and Lucy weren't facing this disaster alone. Old Pete, who had become one of Clara's strongest supporters, organized the men to start clearing away the burned timbers and planning the new barn. The women, led by Lucy Wilson herself, began cooking meals for all the workers and making plans to share hay from their own barns to get the Wilson cattle through the winter. But Clara was thinking about more than just rebuilding. She was thinking about justice. "We need to document everything," she told Jake as they watched their neighbors work together. "Names of Vincent's men, the exact time this happened, witnesses who saw them do it. We're going to build a case that even a territorial judge can't ignore." Jake looked at her with something that might have been admiration. "You really think we can make this stick in court?" "I think we have to try," Clara said. "Because if we don't, this is just the beginning. Next time it might be someone's house that burns down or worse." As the sun set over the Wilson ranch, Clara and Jake found themselves working side by side to raise the first beam of the new barn. Their hands touched as they lifted the heavy timber, and for a moment, Clara forgot about Vincent and his threats. She was aware only of Jake's strength beside her, the warmth of his skin, and the way he looked at her like she was the bravest person he had ever known. "Clara," he said quietly, so only she could hear, "what you did today, organizing all this, I've never seen anything like it." "We did this together," she said, but she felt her cheeks getting warm. "No," Jake said, his dark eyes serious. "This was your idea, your plan. You turned a bunch of scared, isolated families into a real community. That's not something just anyone could do." Clara wanted to say something in response, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just looked into Jake's eyes and felt something shift between them, something that had been building for weeks, but had never been acknowledged. They might have started as strangers making a business deal, but somewhere along the way, they had become true partners. And maybe, Clara thought as she watched Jake's strong hands working beside hers, they were becoming something even more than that. Clara was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the thunder of horses approaching. At first, she thought it might be one of their neighbors coming with news about their fight against Vincent. But when she looked up and saw the dust cloud on the horizon, her blood turned to ice. There were too many riders. Way too many. She dropped the wet shirt she was holding and ran toward the house, calling for Jake. He was in the barn with Pete and 2 other ranch hands, checking on a mare that was about to give birth. When he heard the urgency in Clara's voice, he came running immediately. "What is it?" he asked, but then he saw the riders himself. At least 20 men on horseback moving fast toward their ranch. Even from a distance, Clara could see that they were armed. "Get the rifles," Jake told Pete, "and send Bobby to alert the others. Tell them we need help now." But Clara knew it was too late for help. The riders would be at their front door in less than 5 minutes, and their nearest neighbors were at least 10 minutes away. Whatever was about to happen, they would have to face it alone. As the riders got closer, Clara could make out the man leading them. Vincent Harwick sat tall in his saddle, dressed in an expensive black coat and hat that made him look more like a banker than a rancher. His face wore the same cold smile she remembered from their engagement parties, the smile that had once made her think he was charming but now made her skin crawl. The riders surrounded the house and barn, cutting off any chance of escape. Vincent rode right up to the front porch where Clara and Jake were standing, close enough that Clara could see the anger burning in his pale blue eyes. "Hello, my dear," Vincent said, tipping his hat to Clara like they were meeting at a church. "Social instead of a standoff. You've led me on quite a chase." "What do you want, Harwick?" Jake asked, his hand resting on the gun at his side. Vincent's smile got wider, but it never reached his eyes. "I want what belongs to me. My bride seems to have gotten confused about where she belongs." "I'm not your bride," Clara said, stepping closer to Jake. I'm Mrs. Rivers now, legally married and under my husband's protection. Are you? Vincent asked, reaching into his coat. Clara tensed, thinking he was going for a gun, but instead he pulled out a thick envelope. Because according to these documents, you're still legally bound to marry me. He handed the papers to Jake, who looked them over with a frown. Clara felt her heart sink as she saw Jake's expression change. What do they say? She asked. They're saying our marriage isn't legal, Jake said slowly. According to this, you were already engaged to Vincent when we got married, and territorial law says that makes our ceremony invalid. Clara felt like she had been punched in the stomach. That's not possible. The engagement was broken when I ran away. Vincent laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Did you sign any papers breaking our engagement? Did you formally notify the territorial court that you were ending our arrangement? Clara knew she hadn't done any of those things. When she had run away, she had been thinking about survival, not legal paperwork. She had just assumed that running away would be enough to end their engagement. According to territorial law, Vincent continued, enjoying every word, you are still my intended bride. And that means this little marriage play acting you've been doing with Rivers here is nothing but a fraud. Even if that's true, Jake said, his voice steady despite the anger Clara could hear underneath. Clara is under my protection. She's not going anywhere with you. Vincent's men shifted in their saddles, hands moving closer to their weapons. Clara could see Pete and the other ranch hands watching from the barn, outnumbered but ready to fight if Jake gave the word. Actually, Vincent said, pulling out another set of papers, I think she is. This time the papers made Jake's face go completely white. He read them twice before looking up at Vincent with pure hatred. What do they say? Clara asked, though she was afraid to know. He's claiming ownership of the water rights, Jake said. All of them. He says that since you're still legally his bride, anything you inherited from your father automatically belongs to him. Clara felt the world spinning around her. Everything they had worked for, everything they had built with the other ranchers, was falling apart. Without the water rights, they had no legal way to stop Vincent from taking over every ranch in the county. But that's not all, Vincent said, clearly enjoying their shock. You see, I've done some research on this property. Interesting thing about water rights, if someone is using water illegally, the rightful owner can demand compensation for every gallon that was stolen. Jake's jaw clenched. What are you getting at? I'm getting at the fact that you've been using my water to keep your cattle alive for the past month, Vincent said. According to my calculations, you owe me about $50,000 in damages. $50,000. Clara knew that was more money than Jake had ever seen in his life. It was more money than most ranchers would see in 10 lifetimes. Of course, Vincent continued, I'm a reasonable man. I'm willing to forget about the debt in exchange for this property and everything on it. You can sign the deed over to me right now and we'll call it even. And if I don't? Jake asked. Vincent's smile turned truly ugly. Then I'll take you to court for theft, and when you can't pay what you owe, I'll take this ranch anyway. Plus, you'll probably spend a few years in prison for stealing from me. Clara felt sick. Vincent had been planning this for longer than any of them had realized. He hadn't just been trying to get her back. He had been setting a trap that would let him take everything Jake owned, too. There is one other option, Vincent said, looking directly at Clara. You could honor your original engagement and marry me like you were supposed to. If you do that, I'll tear up these papers and let your friend Rivers keep his little ranch. Clara looked at Jake, seeing the defeat in his eyes. They both knew Vincent had them trapped. The law was on his side, and he had enough men to take what he wanted by force if the law wasn't enough, but Clara also saw something else in Jake's eyes. She saw love, real love, not the fake charm that Vincent had used to trick her. Jake was willing to give up everything he owned to protect her, even though it would destroy him. I need time to think, Clara said. You have until tomorrow morning, Vincent said. I'll be staying at the hotel in town tonight, and I expect your answer first thing in the morning. If you decide to honor your commitment to me, we can be married by the territorial judge tomorrow afternoon. If not, He didn't finish the threat, but he didn't need to. His men would come back in force, and this time they wouldn't just be talking. Vincent tipped his hat again and turned his horse around. "Until tomorrow, my dear," he called as he rode away with his men. Clara and Jake stood on the porch, watching the dust cloud disappear in the distance. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they couldn't say. "Clara," Jake finally said, his voice rough, "you can't marry him. I don't care what happens to this ranch or to me. You can't go back to that man." Clara turned to look at him, memorizing every detail of his face. His strong jaw, his dark eyes, the scar on his forehead from a horse kick when he was young. This was the man who had saved her life, who had taught her to be strong, who had shown her what real partnership looked like. "What if there was another way?" she asked quietly. "What do you mean?" Clara was thinking about the water rights papers, about territorial law, about all the things Vincent thought he was so smart about. Maybe he had been planning this trap for a long time, but Clara had been learning too. And she might just have found a hole in Vincent's perfect plan. "I mean," she said, taking Jake's hand, "what if Vincent isn't as smart as he thinks he is?" Clara didn't sleep at all that night. She sat at Jake's kitchen table with the water rights papers spread out in front of her, reading every word by lamplight while Jake paced the floor behind her. Outside, they could hear Vincent's men moving around in the darkness, making sure no one could leave the ranch without being seen. "There," Clara said suddenly, pointing to a section of small print on one of the documents. "Jake, look at this." Jake leaned over her shoulder to read where she was pointing. His closeness made her heart beat faster, but she forced herself to focus on the legal language in front of them. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "The date," Clara said excitedly. "Look at the date on Vincent's claim to the water rights." Jake squinted at the tiny numbers. "October 15th, 1873. "Right, but look at this." Clara pulled out another document, one of the original papers her father had hidden. "My father bought these rights on October 10th, 1873, 5 days earlier." Jake straightened up, understanding dawning on his face. "So Vincent's claim isn't valid, exactly, but there's more." Clara shuffled through the papers until she found what she was looking for. "Vincent is claiming I'm still legally bound to marry him because I never formally broke our engagement. But look at this marriage certificate." She held up the paper from their wedding ceremony. "We were married by Reverend Thompson, who is a legally appointed minister in this territory. That makes our marriage completely legal regardless of any previous engagement." "But Vincent seemed pretty confident about his legal position," Jake said. "Why would he risk everything on documents that don't hold up?" Clara smiled grimly. "Because he's been dealing with scared ranchers who don't know anything about territorial law. He's been using fake legal papers to intimidate people into selling their land for almost nothing. But he made one mistake. He tried to use the same trick on someone who actually knows how to read legal documents." Before Jake could respond, they heard a loud crack from somewhere outside, followed by shouting. Jake grabbed his rifle and ran to the window, with Clara right behind him. "What's happening?" she asked. "They cut the fence," Jake said grimly. "Vincent's men are driving our cattle away." Clara felt a surge of anger. It wasn't enough for Vincent to threaten them with fake legal papers. Now he was stealing their livestock too. She watched through the window as dark figures on horseback herded Jake's cattle toward the horizon. "We have to stop them," she said. "With what?" Jake asked. "There are only 4 of us here, and at least 20 of them. If we go out there, we'll just get ourselves killed." More sounds came from outside. The splintering of wood, the crash of breaking glass. Vincent's men were systematically destroying everything they couldn't steal. Clara saw flames start to flicker from the direction of the equipment shed. "They're burning the tools," Pete called from upstairs, where he was keeping watch from a bedroom window, Jake's hands clenched into fists. Clara could see how much it was costing him to stand there and watch years of hard work being destroyed. But she also knew he was right. Going outside would be suicide. "There has to be something we can do," she said. "Maybe there is," Jake said slowly. "Pete, can you see if they're watching the back of the house?" Looks like they've got men posted all around, Pete called back. But there's a gap near the old oak tree. Might be able to slip through there if someone was real careful. Clara immediately understood what Jake was thinking. You want to sneak out and get help from the other ranchers. It's our only chance, Jake said. If I can make it to Tom Wilson's place, he can spread the word to the others. 20 of Vincent's men might be able to handle us, but they can't handle all of us together. It's too dangerous, Clara said. If they catch you, if I don't try, we're all dead anyway, Jake said. Vincent isn't planning to let any of us walk away from this. Clara knew he was right, but the thought of Jake disappearing into the darkness while Vincent's men hunted him made her feel sick with worry. What if something happened to him? What if she never saw him again? Jake, she said quietly, catching his arm as he headed for the back door. Be careful. He turned to look at her, and for a moment all the feelings they had been holding back seemed to hang in the air between them. Then Jake leaned down and kissed her, quick and desperate, like a man who might not get another chance. I'll be back, he promised. You just keep yourself safe until I get here with help. After Jake disappeared into the shadows behind the house, Clara took charge of defending the ranch. She positioned Pete at the front window with the best rifle, while the other two ranch hands, Billy and Carson, watched the sides of the house. Don't shoot unless they try to come inside, she told them. We need to save our ammunition. But Vincent's men seemed content to stay outside for now, destroying property and making noise. Clara realized they were trying to terrorize them, too. Make them so afraid that they would surrender without a fight. She was not going to let that happen. Clara moved from window to window, keeping track of where Vincent's men were positioned and what they were doing. She counted at least 15 riders, which meant Vincent had left some men in town, probably watching the roads in case Jake tried to get help as the hours passed. Clara found herself thinking about how much her life had changed. 2 months ago, she had been a pampered city girl who had never held a gun or made a decision more important than what dress to wear to a party. Now she was organizing the defense of a ranch under siege, and she felt more alive and capable than she ever had before. Around midnight, Carson called out from the side window. Miss Clara, they're doing something different over here. Clara hurried to look. 3 of Vincent's men had dismounted and were carrying bundles of hay toward the house. Even in the darkness, she could see the flicker of flames. They're going to try to burn us out, she said. What do we do? Billy asked, fear clear in his young voice. Clara thought fast. If Vincent's men set fire to the house, they would have to choose between burning alive and running outside where they could be shot down. But there might be another option. Pete, she called. How's your aim in the dark? Good enough, the old foreman replied. What do you need me to do? Those men with the torches. Can you hit them from here? Pete squinted through the rifle sight. Maybe, but if I miss, they'll know we're willing to fight, and they might rush the house. Clara felt the weight of the decision. She was asking Pete to take a shot that could save them or get them all killed. But she also knew that if they did nothing, they would definitely die when the house caught fire. Take the shot, she said. Pete's rifle cracked through the night air. One of the men carrying burning hay stumbled and fell, dropping his torch in the dirt where it flickered and went out. The other 2 men scrambled for cover, their plans disrupted. Shouts erupted from all around the house as Vincent's men realized they were under fire. Clara heard the sound of boots running toward the front porch. Here they come, Billy called out. Clara grabbed a pistol from Jake's gun cabinet and checked to make sure it was loaded. Her hands were steadier than she expected. All those weeks of ranch work had given her confidence in her own abilities, and she was not going to let Vincent's men intimidate her. The front door exploded inward as 3 men kicked it down. The first man through the door was met by Pete's rifle, and he went down immediately. The second man raised his gun toward Clara, but she was faster. The pistol kicked in her hands as she fired, and the man spun around and crashed into the wall. She had never shot anyone before, but she felt no hesitation. These men had come to kill her and destroy everything she and Jake had built together. The third man hesitated when he saw his companions fall, and that hesitation cost him his life. As Carson's shotgun boomed from the side window. Is everyone all right? Clara called out. We're good, Pete replied. But that was just the first wave. They'll be back with more men. Clara nodded, reloading her pistol with hands that barely trembled. She didn't know how long they could hold out, or if Jake would make it back in time with help. But she knew one thing for certain: she was not the same frightened woman who had collapsed on Jake's porch 2 months ago. She was Clara Rivers now, and she would fight for her home and her husband until her last breath. Dawn was breaking over the Wyoming territory when Clara heard the sound she had been praying for all night, the thunder of many horses approaching fast. But this time, the riders weren't coming to attack them. These were their neighbors, led by Jake, riding hard toward the ranch with the morning sun at their backs. Clara counted at least 30 riders, men from every ranch in their association. Tom Wilson was there, along with Frank Patterson and a dozen others she recognized. They had come armed and ready to fight, just like they had promised they would. Vincent's men, who had been preparing for another attack on the house, suddenly found themselves surrounded and outnumbered. Clara watched from the window as confusion spread through their ranks. They had expected to face a few scared ranchers, not a small army of determined men who knew how to fight. "Harwick!" Jake's voice carried across the yard as he rode up to where Vincent was standing near the barn. "It's over. Call off your men and get off our land." Vincent looked around at the riders surrounding his men, his face pale but still defiant. "You're making a big mistake, Rivers. I have legal documents that prove this land belongs to me." "Funny thing about those documents," Clara called out as she stepped onto the front porch. She was still holding the pistol, and her dress was torn from the night's fighting, but she had never felt stronger. "I've been reading them real carefully, and they're not worth the paper they're printed on." Vincent's eyes narrowed as he looked at her. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Clara held up the water rights papers. "You claim you bought these rights in October 1873, but my father bought them 5 days earlier. That makes your claim completely worthless." Murmurs went through both groups of men as they realized what Clara was saying. Vincent had built his entire plan around documents that were fake. "Even if that's true," Vincent said, but Clara could hear the uncertainty in his voice now, "you're still legally bound to marry me. That engagement contract is binding under territorial law." "Maybe it would be," Clara said, "if I wasn't already married to Jake Rivers. We were wed by a legally appointed minister, which makes our marriage completely valid. Your engagement contract died the moment I said I do to another man." Vincent's face went red with anger. "You think you're so smart," he snarled. "But legal papers don't mean anything out here. I've got enough men to take what I want by force." "Look around," Jake said calmly. "Count how many guns are pointed at you right now." Vincent did look around, and Clara saw the exact moment when he realized his position was hopeless. His 20 men were surrounded by 30 angry ranchers who had been pushed too far. Even if Vincent's men were better armed, they were badly outnumbered. But Vincent Harwick had not become one of the biggest landowners in the territory by giving up easily. Clara saw his hand move toward his gun, and she knew he was about to do something desperate. "Vincent, don't!" she called out. "It's over. Take your men and leave, and nobody has to get hurt." "You ruined everything," Vincent shouted, his careful composure finally cracking. "I had it all planned out perfectly. You were supposed to be a quiet little wife who did what she was told. Instead, you turned into some kind of what?" Clara asked, stepping down from the porch. "Some kind of woman who fights back? Some kind of person who won't let you steal everything my father worked for?" Vincent's gun was in his hand now, pointed directly at Clara. The yard went completely silent as everyone realized what was happening. Jake started to move toward her, but Clara held up her hand to stop him. "You want to shoot me, Vincent?" she asked, walking slowly toward him. "Go ahead. But you should know that every person here is a witness. Kill me, and you'll hang for murder." "Maybe. I don't care anymore," Vincent said, but his hand was shaking. "Maybe I'd rather see you dead than see you with him." Clara kept walking until she was close enough to see the sweat on Vincent's forehead and the fear in his eyes. He might be willing to kill her, but he wasn't willing to die for it, and that's what would happen if he pulled that trigger. "You know, "What the difference is between you and me, Vincent?" she said quietly. "You think people are things you can own and control. But I learned something these past 2 months. Real strength comes from working together, from building something instead of just taking it." "Shut up," Vincent said, but his voice was weak now. "Look around you," Clara continued. "Look at all these people who came here to fight for each other. That's something you'll never understand, because you've never cared about anyone but yourself." Vincent's gun hand was shaking so badly now that Clara doubted he could hit anything even if he tried. She could see the defeat in his eyes, the realization that all his careful plans had fallen apart. "It's over, Vincent," she said gently. "Put the gun down." For a moment, Clara thought he was going to do it. Vincent's hand started to lower, as she thought the worst was behind them. But then his face twisted with rage and he raised the gun again. "If I can't have you," he said, "then nobody can." The gunshot was incredibly loud in the morning air, but it wasn't Vincent's gun that fired. Jake had drawn faster than Clara had ever seen anyone move, and his bullet took Vincent in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun flying. Into the dirt, Vincent fell to his knees, clutching his wounded shoulder and cursing. His men, seeing their leader defeated, began dropping their weapons and raising their hands in surrender. "Anybody else want to try something stupid?" Jake asked, his gun still drawn. When no one answered, he looked at Tom Wilson. "Tom, would you mind riding into town and getting the territorial marshal? I think he's going to want to hear about all this." As Tom rode away, Clara walked over to where Vincent was kneeling in the dirt. He looked up at her with hate and pain in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said through gritted teeth. "I have friends in high places. Judges, politicians, people with real power. They'll never let a bunch of dirt farmers defeat me." Clara knelt down so she was at his eye level. "You know what, Vincent? Maybe you do have powerful friends, but I have something better." "What's that?" Clara looked around at all the ranchers who had come to help them, at Jake who had risked everything to protect her, at Pete and the ranch hands who had fought beside her through the night. "I have people who care about doing what's right," she said. "And in the end, that's always stronger than money and power." When the territorial marshal arrived an hour later, he found Vincent and his men tied up and waiting for him. Clara presented all the evidence they had gathered, the fake legal documents, witness statements about the attacks on various ranches, and proof of Vincent's illegal attempts to steal water rights. "This is quite a case you've built here, Mrs. Rivers," the marshal said after reviewing everything. "Mr. Harwick is going to be facing some serious charges." As Vincent was loaded into a wagon to be taken to jail, he looked back at Clara one last time. "You think you've won?" he called out. "But you have no idea what it takes to survive out here. Without me, this whole territory will fall apart." Clara watched the wagon disappear down the road, carrying Vincent toward the justice he had avoided for so long. Then she turned to Jake, who was standing beside her with his arm around her waist. "Do you think he's right?" she asked. "Do you think we can really build something better here?" Jake looked out over the land they had fought so hard to protect, then down at the woman who had changed his life in ways he never could have imagined. "With you as my partner?" he said, smiling for the first time in days. "I think we can do anything." Dawn was breaking over the Wyoming territory when Clara heard the sound she had been praying for all night, the thunder of many horses approaching fast. But this time, the riders weren't coming to attack them. These were their neighbors, led by Jake, riding hard toward the ranch with the morning sun at their backs. Clara counted at least 30 riders, men from every ranch in their association. Tom Wilson was there, along with Frank Patterson and a dozen others she recognized. They had come armed and ready to fight, just like they had promised they would. Vincent's men, who had been preparing for another attack on the house, suddenly found themselves surrounded and outnumbered. Clara watched from the window as confusion spread through their ranks. They had expected to face a few scared ranchers, not a small army of determined men who knew how to fight. "Harwick!" Jake's voice carried across the yard as he rode up to where Vincent was standing near the barn. "It's over. Call off your men and get off our land." Vincent looked around at the riders surrounding his men, his face pale but still defiant. "You're making a big mistake, Rivers. I have legal documents that prove this land belongs to me." "Funny thing about those documents," Clara called out as she stepped onto the front porch. She was still holding the pistol, and her dress was torn from the night's fighting, but she had never felt stronger. "I've been reading them real carefully, and they're not worth the paper they're printed on." Vincent's eyes narrowed as he looked at her. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Clara held up the water rights papers. "You claim you bought these rights in October 1873? But my father bought them 5 days earlier. That makes your claim completely worthless." Murmurs went through both groups of men as they realized what Clara was saying. Vincent had built his entire plan around documents that were fake. "Even if that's true," Vincent said, but Clara could hear the uncertainty in his voice now, "you're still legally bound to marry me. That engagement contract is binding under territorial law." "Maybe it would be," Clara said, "if I wasn't already married to Jake Rivers. We were wed by a legally appointed minister, which makes our marriage completely valid. Your engagement contract died the moment I said I do to another man." Vincent's face went red with anger. "You think you're so smart," he snarled. "But legal papers don't mean anything out here. I've got enough men to take what I want by force." "Look around," Jake said calmly. "Count how many guns are pointed at you right now." Vincent did look around, and Clara saw the exact moment when he realized his position was hopeless. His 20 men were surrounded by 30 angry ranchers who had been pushed too far. Even if Vincent's men were better armed, they were badly outnumbered. But Vincent Harwick had not become one of the biggest landowners in the territory by giving up easily. Clara saw his hand move toward his gun, and she knew he was about to do something desperate. "Vincent, don't!" she called out. "It's over. Take your men and leave, and nobody has to get hurt." "You ruined everything," Vincent shouted, his careful composure finally cracking. "I had it all planned out perfectly. You were supposed to be a quiet little wife who did what she was told. Instead, you turned into some kind of..." "Some kind of what?" Clara asked, stepping down from the porch. "Some kind of woman who fights back? Some kind of person who won't let you steal everything my father worked for?" Vincent's gun was in his hand now, pointed directly at Clara. The yard went completely silent as everyone realized what was happening. Jake started to move toward her, but Clara held up her hand to stop him. "You want to shoot me, Vincent?" she asked, walking slowly toward him. "Go ahead. But you should know that every person here is a witness. Kill me, and you'll hang for murder." "Maybe." "I don't care anymore," Vincent said, but his hand was shaking. "Maybe I'd rather see you dead than see you with him." Clara kept walking until she was close enough to see the sweat on Vincent's forehead and the fear in his eyes. He might be willing to kill her, but he wasn't willing to die for it, and that's what would happen if he pulled that trigger. "You know what the difference is between you and me, Vincent," she said quietly. "You think people are things you can own and control. But I learned something these past 2 months. Real strength comes from working together, from building something instead of just taking it." "Shut up," Vincent said, but his voice was weak now. "Look around you," Clara continued. "Look at all these people who came here to fight for each other. That's something you'll never understand because you've never cared about anyone but yourself." Vincent's gun hand was shaking so badly now that Clara doubted he could hit anything even if he tried. She could see the defeat in his eyes, the realization that all his careful plans had fallen apart. "It's over, Vincent," she said gently. "Put the gun down." For a moment, Clara thought he was going to do it. Vincent's hand started to lower, and she thought the worst was behind them. But then his face twisted with rage, and he raised the gun again. "If I can't have you," he said, "then nobody can." The gunshot was incredibly loud in the morning air, but it wasn't Vincent's gun that fired. Jake had drawn faster than Clara had ever seen anyone move, and his bullet took Vincent in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun flying. Into the dirt, Vincent fell to his knees, clutching his wounded shoulder and cursing. His men, seeing their leader defeated, began dropping their weapons and raising their hands in surrender. Anybody else want to try something stupid? Jake asked, his gun still drawn. When no one answered, he looked at Tom Wilson. Tom, would you mind riding into town and getting the territorial marshal? I think he's going to want to hear about all this. As Tom rode away, Clara walked over to where Vincent was kneeling in the dirt. He looked up at her with hate and pain in his eyes. This isn't over, he said through gritted teeth. I have friends in high places. Judges, politicians, people with real power. They'll never let a bunch of dirt farmers defeat me. Clara knelt down so she was at his eye level. You know what, Vincent? Maybe you do have powerful friends, but I have something better. What's that? Clara looked around at all the ranchers who had come to help them, at Jake, who had risked everything to protect her, at Pete and the ranch hands who had fought beside her through the night. I have people who care about doing what's right, she said. And in the end, that's always stronger than money and power. When the territorial marshal arrived an hour later, he found Vincent and his men tied up and waiting for him. Clara presented all the evidence they had gathered, the fake legal documents, witness statements about the attacks on various ranches, and proof of Vincent's illegal attempts to steal water rights. This is quite a case you've built here, Mrs. Rivers, the marshal said after reviewing everything. Mr. Harwick is going to be facing some serious charges. As Vincent was loaded into a wagon to be taken to jail, he looked back at Clara one last time. You think you've won? He called out. But you have no idea what it takes to survive out here. Without me, this whole territory will fall apart. Clara watched the wagon disappear down the road, carrying Vincent toward the justice he had avoided for so long. Then she turned to Jake, who was standing beside her with his arm around her waist. Do you think he's right? She asked. Do you think we can really build something better here? Jake looked out over the land they had fought so hard to protect, then down at the woman who had changed his life in ways he never could have imagined. With you as my partner? He said, smiling for the first time in days. I think we can do anything.